Chapter 5. When Wendy Orr came back to her locker after last class on Monday, she found a folded mimeograph notice taped to the door. There were similar notices on the doors of every other locker in the school. Intrigued, she opened it. It read, "Concerned students of Nassau Arts, are you upset by the destruction of the North Woods and Schuyler's Creek area by Interflux? Are you worried about the possible side effects of Interflux's proposed new expansion? The Nassau Arts Student Council Program Board presents Anti-Flux. General Students Meeting Wednesday, September 19th in the Nassau Arts Cafeteria at 3:30 p.m. All welcome." Wendy frowned. She knew from the name Anti-Flux that it had to be Simon's doing. Because the meeting was on Wednesday after school, she assumed it was a cheap ploy to keep her from informing the proper authorities about his fraud. But the notice made it seem also reasonable. People would come out for this. What was he going to say to them? If he told them the truth, something that Sleazebag was not noted for, they'd kill him, which of course he deserved. If he tried to lie, which she fully expected, then she would be right there, right at the meeting, to set the record straight. And then she'd go to the authorities and report him. She smiled, sure of herself once more. Yes, that was exactly what she would do. She'd hold off on reporting Simon until after this big meeting. The nerve of that sleazebag, calling a meeting without consulting her. Simon had never been much for extracurricular activities. In fact, Wednesday was his first, and he found himself in charge. He was the head of the Nassau Arts Program Board, which consisted of himself, Phil, and a rather reluctant Sam. Sam would have preferred to be counted as one of the attendees of the meeting rather than one of the organizers, but Phil hit him with a strong taking a stand lecture and a few home truths about friendship. Sam finally agreed to take his place on the rostrum, but not without restating his opinions regarding stupid, impulsive, harebrained ideas. "How can you say that?" Phil challenged. "Remember, this meeting came from your idea, so if anybody's stupid, impulsive, and harebrained, it's you." "I dispensed calm and sensible advice," Sam smugly, "and you blew it all out of proportion." The head count was about 80, which was excellent considering Nassau Arts students didn't ordinarily turn out for such events. Simon decided it was another sign as to just how unpopular Interflux was among the students. He could see Wendy Orr, tight-lipped with rage, standing at the back of the cafeteria. An expert in body language, Wendy was conveying with the utmost clarity the message, "One wrong move and you're dead." Her front of severity was compromised somewhat by her friend Barbara, who stood beside her, staring up at the rollaway platform where Sam was holding a whispered argument with Phil. In fact, Simon could see that Sam's presence on the podium was certainly boosting the image of Anti-Flux among the girls in the room, even though the meeting had not yet begun. Simon approached his two friends. "What are we supposed to say, anyway?" "No problem," said Phil, standing up and walking out to the edge of the podium. "Attention, everybody! Thanks for coming out. We're the Nassau Arts Student Council Program Board, and we'd like to welcome you to our Anti-Flux program. I'm Phil Baldwin, and you probably all know Sam Stavrinidis, and this is our program director, Simon Irving." He paused, groping for something to say, and finding nothing, announced, "We've got a lot to tell you, so, here's Simon!" There were a few seconds of polite applause, during which time Phil returned to his seat beside Sam, and as he passed Simon, he tapped him on the arm and whispered, "You're on your own." That was a big help," Simon muttered sarcastically. As he looked nervously over the assembled sea of faces, he had a vision of his 9th grade report card. Public speaking, F. I suppose you're wondering why I called you here, ha ha!" His reply was a few discontented murmurs and a lot of restless shuffling. He glanced to the back of the room where Wendy stood, arms folded, looking daggers at him, and realized that if he got an F in this particular public speech, it was curtains for Simon Irving, Irving Simon, and all combinations thereof. He felt a strange, cold clamminess, a feeling that he was standing totally alone, and only his ingenuity stood between complete disaster and living to see another day. Look, he began, I'm no talker, so maybe I won't say this right, but it's something you all ought to know. We're all here because we're concerned about how the way Interflux looks at this whole town, Nassau Arts included, as existing just to serve their plant. It's happening to Greenbush the same way it's happening to a list of towns as long as your arm, except what they're planning here is 5 times what they've ever done anywhere else. And we can't take it lying down because 2 years down the line, Interflux will build us another hockey rink or another swimming pool or put an addition on the library, and we'll be expected to say, oh, thank you, master, for paving the woods and putting up warehouses and running more cars through town than the Jersey Turnpike sees in a month. Thank you for building up smokestacks so high that the pollution is 10 hours old before we have to breathe it. We've got to do something because the city officials are going to continue to sit on their cans, building up the muscles in their index fingers on their pocket calculators while they add up how much tax money Interflux gave them this month. No one else is going to buck Interflux. It's up to us. Didn't he tell us he flunked public speaking? Phil whispered to Sam as Simon continued to harangue the crowd with the expertise of a seasoned orator. Sam shook his head. There's just something about this guy in Interflux. I mean, normally he's this mild-mannered person who minds his own business, but as soon as Interflux comes up, he's off like a shot, half-cocked, buying land with someone else's money, and making speeches that would raise the dead to revolution. Phil shrugged. Maybe he just got a good-looking Wendy and realizes he's fighting for his life. By this time, Simon was pacing up and down in his zeal, waving his arms before the captivated audience. We're an art school, and we've got the right to a peaceful environment to work in. Within reason, of course. We can't expect Interflux to stop everything because of us, but we can fight them over this ridiculous expansion that will have anyone who walks 2 feet past our parking lot bumping into our warehouse full of zipper teeth. Sam sat up bolt upright. Fight the expansion? When did this happen? I thought this whole thing was just to keep Wendy off his back. A photography student looked near the front, spoke up. You talk a good game, but what makes you think Interflux is going to listen to us? Yeah, someone else called. This isn't exactly the first time people have been after Interflux. They're used to this stuff. What are we gonna do? Picket? Big deal. Send them a petition? Toilet paper for the executive washroom! Shouted someone from the back. Several voices added, yeah, and some students headed for the exit. Hold it, called Simon. That was what I was about to tell you. We've already done something. He paused until he was certain of their full attention, then pulled out the town land map that had come with the title deed. Here's Interflux, here's Nassau Arts. If Interflux wants to build, they're going to have to run trucks over this long black strip of land. Last week, we bought it. Dead silence fell. All 80 of the students stared at Simon in mute wonder as they digested this information. A girl halfway out the large door slowly eased herself back into the room, goggle-eyed. For a few seconds, not a sound was heard in the cafeteria. Then someone tittered, someone else laughed. A contagious wave of mirth swept over the crowd until everyone was laughing to the point of tears. A group in a back corner began to applaud, and that caught on as well, until Simon, Phil, and Sam found themselves on the receiving end of a rousing standing ovation. Feeling a great rush of elation, Simon surveyed the crowd until his eyes lit on Wendy. He had never seen her angrier, not even when she was in the process of stuffing a ballet slipper into his mouth. And every ounce of approval for Simon and Anti-Flux that she sensed in the room irked her that much more. For some reason, he had an insane urge to rush over and ask her out, although it was becoming increasingly apparent that he had missed his last chance to do that in the 4-hour interval between lunch last Tuesday and that painful scene in the warm-up studio. In a sobering thought, he realized that she still might turn him in spite of the success of the meeting and the fact that she was the only person in the room, Barbara included, who was not smiling and cheering. Barbara apparently found the brilliance of Interflux to be just another one of the many endearing qualities of Sam. Simon held up his hands for order and gradually got some semblance of quiet. I also should mention that we all owe a great deal of thanks to Student Council President Wendy Orr for making the funds available. All eyes turned to the back of the room, and at that precise moment, Wendy replaced her scowl with a disarming smile as she acknowledged her many well-wishers. Masterful, approved Phil. He pulled it off perfectly. And now, shouted Simon, it's time for us to take our next step. Next step, Sam repeated. What next step? We're going to go out there and fence off our land so that when the Interflux bulldozers and trucks come, they won't be able to get through to the construction site. Another cheer went up. By this time, the group had grown to about 100, with the addition of students who had come to investigate the source of all the noise. Sam slumped in his chair. This is it, he told Phil as everyone raved about Simon's latest suggestion. We are actually witnessing the birth of a stupid, impulsive, harebrained idea. Phil was on his feet right at Simon's side. We need stakes to use as fence posts, he called out. As many as you can get. They don't have to be beautiful. They just have to be stakes. Raid the school. Raid the DeWitt Plaza. Your house. Your neighbor's house. And rope. Bring twine, string, clothesline, cord. All you can get. There was a mad scuffle as the students all scattered in search of fencing materials. I want to take a moment here to just let you know about just one little interesting tidbit of mine regarding this. Now remember, when I first read this book, obviously, naturally, I envisioned the possibility of it being made into a movie. And I'm not gonna deny this in any way, shape, or form. When the movie I had in my head reached this point of the story, I kinda envisioned this whole scene being played out with Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now by Starship playing in the background. Because I'm that person. By 7:30 that night, the fence was up. It wasn't pretty, but the land now fulfilled all the legal requirements of a fenced-in area. This is a fence like Charlotte's Creek was a stream, Sam pointed out once the line of fencing had started to grow. Exactly, said Phil, pounding a length of discarded banister into the ground with a heavy hammer. The enterprise had started immediately after the meeting broke up. While the students were combing Greenbush and the surrounding areas, Simon, Phil, and Sam trekked out to the land armed with a surveyor's report to mark off the exact perimeters of Lot 1346B. They actually found old stakes and official town markers, most of them buried or rotted away, but all of them a welcome confirmation of their own measurements. If Interflux had taken the time to look at the area at some point in the last 30 years, Simon noted with satisfaction, they would have seen the markers, realized the situation, and avoided what he hoped to turn into a real problem. The three finished the land survey in 45 minutes, Simon with determination, Phil with clean-cut enjoyment, and Sam with continuous warnings about the futility of the exercise. Fighting the expansion, he pointed out, was only slightly easier than halting the arms race, outlawing chocolate, or slicing off the Himalayas and relocating them in downtown Baltimore. He had to keep his opinions to himself once the students began to arrive laden with the building materials, ready and eager to participate in the only decent program the school has ever come up with. Even Sam knew better than to demoralize the troops at the beginning of the war. The fence required more than 200 stakes roped together with everything from fishing line to grocery string. Even then, there was a multitude of material left over. You better save it just in case, advised Dave Rober, who was emerging as the liaison between the workers and the Interflux top brass. Why? Well, you never know, we could buy more land. But there is no more land. Still, it could come in handy. If another lot comes open suddenly, we won't be caught off guard. It was finally agreed that the extra materials would be heaped at the very rear of the property. When the fence was finished and the last post, an old broken hockey stick, had been connected to the first, a rotted 2x4, by means of a few old bicycle chains, the crew of 100 stood back to survey the finished project duct. "It looks too naked," Dave said, reporting the consensus of the masses. "The Interflux bulldozers might not pay attention to it at all and just run right through it. It's too, insubstantial." It was then time for Phil Baldwin to add his bit of creativity to the project. With Phil in the lead shouting encouragement, the group stampeded back to the Nassau Arts building, raided the paper supply storeroom, and set to work lettering signs to be placed at 10-foot intervals around the perimeter. These read, "No trespassing, property of Interflux, a bad neighbor." Well pleased with themselves, Interflux went home. The next day, Simon found himself the object of much attention as word of Interflux spread throughout Nassau Arts. Countless times, students who had been present on Wednesday stopped him in the hall to introduce him to his friend. "Hey, this is the guy I was just telling you about," they would say, "the one who's giving it to Interflux." Then Simon would be congratulated all around, praised to the skies, and offered all the help he might need. Sam and Phil were receiving some of the same treatment, as was ironically Wendy Orr. As student council president, it was assumed that she was an important factor in Interflux, which in a way she was, since yesterday's meeting had really started out as a ploy to keep her from shooting Simon down in disgrace. According to reports, she was acting the part pretty well, smiling in all the right places and making sure to refer any questions to Simon. A few times, Simon experimented with actually approaching Wendy, but every time he got within about 20 feet, the sparks from her eyes would singe his confidence and he would retreat. He may have been director of the Nassau Arts Program Board and the father of Interflux, but to Wendy he was still the sleazebag who cleaned out her party fund. Here we go. That week, Emil Carada's elite painting seminar hit its stride, and the first few finished pieces of work were ready for class presentation and analysis. Simon was having a little trouble dealing with his newfound respect for Carada. He had been charmed by the book, but the fact remained that Emil Carada was an escapee from a rubber room with a definite tendency towards sadism. "Miss Dixon's mother and child brings to mind a story you should all hear. When I was in Paris, I was walking down the street, and I came upon a painting very much like this one in an art shop window. Like Miss Dixon's work, it was very well done. The brushwork was good, and the colors were very real. So I asked myself, 'Carada, why do you detest this picture so violently that you would like to destroy it?' And I answered myself, 5 minutes in the company of these persons would be like 100,000 years in purgatory! Look at these faces! There's nothing there! These aren't people!" "That's a picture of my sister and a new baby," said Laura, her calm unruffled. Carada leaped up so high that his head dislodged a piece of acoustic ceiling tile. "Reality is no excuse for a picture!" Sam leaned over to Simon. "When he hits the ceiling, he really hits the ceiling." Now Carada was in the middle of the class, eyes closed, long arms crossed, hands gripping at his shoulders. "When I look at that painting, I have a vision. I see the creep from Albany winning the Vishnik Prize. I see the creep's teacher, also a creep. How happy he looks. I see Carada. He doesn't look happy at all. I see the judges yawning at your sister and her new baby. Then he broke into a tirade about the Vishnik Prize, assured all 12 students they had no chance of winning, predicted a Vishnik dynasty for Albany, and very nearly burst into tears. Then he peered into each face individually, pleading, "Somebody please pray something that will make this awful vision go away!" Wordlessly, he handed back Laura's picture, and Laura accepted it, also wordlessly. Phil rushed into the cafeteria in a great state of agitation. Spying Simon and Sam, he dashed over, grabbed Sam's drink, and drained it in one gulp. Cutting off Sam's cry of protest, he took a deep breath and launched into his tale of woe. "I can't believe it! I just can't believe it! Yesterday everything was so great, and today this. I've been asked to leave the poetry department. In fact, they insist! Man, TC just moved out of my house the day before yesterday, and I'm back in the hot seat again." "What happened?" Simon asked. Phil shook his head. "I really thought it would take them longer than this to find out I have no talent for poetry, but just because of one little line..." Sam sighed and sat back, resigning himself to being late for next period. "All right, Philip, let's hear the poem." "Well, I should really explain the circumstances first. I'm working on this set of 4 poems representing the seasons, and it's turning out all right. I mean, they're a little boring and everything, but they sound artistic and everything. Is the most poetic poetry I've ever written. Along comes Miss Hotchkiss, and I'm a little late behind here because I joined the class late. I still haven't gotten the last line for winter, and she's really on my case. So I just put the first thing I thought of that rhymed just to shut her up. It's really her fault, not mine." "The poem," Sam repeated. From his pocket, Phil produced a mangled piece of paper. "Winter" by Phil Baldwin. "The seasons are but 4 in count and pass like in parade. With autumn's kiss and winter's nip once spring and summer fade. The winter lays upon the earth a frosting smooth as glass, on which young children skate and slide, and you could break your—" "Phil!" exclaimed Simon in horror. "You didn't hand that in!" "I can see now it may have been a bad decision," Phil said sheepishly, "but she nagged me. She had it coming. You've never heard Miss Hotchkiss. She's got a voice like 40 dolphins holding a sing-along. Anyway, she took one look at my poem and hoofed me out on the spot. Man, it destroys my faith." Phil was so upset over his untimely ejection from poetry that he consoled himself by adding another member to the math homework pool, bringing the enrollment up to 4. Laura Dixon agreed to join after Phil convinced her that she would be able to devote more time to going after the Vishnik Prize if she had 75% less math to worry about. Simon figured that Laura joined the pool in a moment of weakness brought on by Karada's bombardment of mother and child. "I was really feeling for you back there, Laura. That wasn't criticism, that was attempted murder." Laura looked surprised. "Why? He analyzed my work, and now I know exactly what's wrong with it and what I should do to improve it. He was terrific." "Terrific? He jumped so high his head hit the ceiling." "What's wrong with that?" challenged Bill McIntosh, who at 5 inches above Karada spent a lot of his time trying not to hit the ceiling. "You're still pretty new," said Laura, "so you might find Karada a little strange, but to me he's the most wonderful man in the world." At lunch, the quarter-ton couple made news at Nassau Arts. The two, who had both been present at the Interflux meeting, took a walk in the woods together and decided to check on the status of the makeshift fence. There they found 3 large trucks parked along the path which led to the Interflux construction sites, halted at the fence directly facing one of the Property of Antiflux signs. The drivers, they said, were awaiting instructions. The news was extremely well received under the camel in the Nassau Arts cafeteria. "Man, it restores my faith," said Phil, whose faith was on a constant treadmill of destruction and restoration. Sam was impressed in spite of himself. "I really thought they'd just roll over that bunch of sticks and string." "They'll check it out first," said Simon, "and when they do, boy, are they in for a surprise." On Simon's advice, none of the students went out to the site to witness the Interflux dilemma. Not so for Miss Glandfield, however, who had somehow gotten word of the stopped trucks. She canceled all her remaining classes, Simon's included, and took a lawn chair out to lot 1346B to spend the whole afternoon enjoying the spectacle of the corporate giant in trouble. She wasn't exactly certain who was responsible for this fence that was causing Interflux such discomfort. Obviously, it had been inspired by her own strong stand. She hoped that she would soon meet the person or persons involved so she could invite them for tea and crumpets. The spare period gave Simon a chance to study for the test in art history that was coming tomorrow. In all the excitement of the year thus far, he had neglected this course to a shameful degree and had not even paid attention very well during the lectures because Mr. Monagle had such a voice so dull and monotonous that Simon usually spent most of the class asleep. He noticed with some alarm that he had not yet taken the textbook out of the shrink wrap, and the pace of the course was already 90 pages ahead of him. Large pages, with small print. Mr. Durham managed to add another complication to Simon's life in last period. Simon entered English class expecting Buzz to close off the day the way he usually did by babbling about deep hidden meanings until it was time to go home. Simon didn't understand Mr. Durham's lectures, but this didn't bother him since he was certain that nobody else did either, including Mr. Durham himself. But today, Buzz started with a sharp attack on the class, complaining about the low level of psychic growth so far. To stimulate this collection of stagnant energies, he assigned concepts of cyclical symbolism and demanded a 5-page analysis by Monday. Dino of the quarter-ton couple nudged Simon. Is he crazy or something? Simon didn't answer. The question was obviously rhetorical. There was no mistaking Mr. Irving's mood when he came home from work. Obviously, when the stopped truck drivers had reported the situation, Interflux contacted the town, and the whole story had come out. Yes, there was a land strip that Interflux didn't own. And no, they couldn't buy it now because somebody else had bought it just last week. 7 roads into that construction site, and every single one of them goes right through Interflux. Can't you build another road that goes around this strip? His wife suggested helpfully. It's like a swamp out there, Mary. It would be easier to get a submarine through north of that lot. I can't believe my ninnies didn't think to check on a land purchase that was made 30 years ago. Now, if we want to stick with the schedule, we're gonna have to deal with Interflux. Simon's tone was casual. Sounds to me like you people left something to chance. Mr. Irving was not amused. Another town he heard from. Don't get smart, kid. The guy who's running this whole scam uses the address of your school. Have you ever heard of Simon? We can't find anyone there by that name. Simon studied the carpet. It's a big school, Dad. Mr. Irving snorted. And that town hall! Those people are airheads! When brains will be given out, they must have been on coffee break, just like they are every time I try to phone. Do you realize this one woman kept me on the phone half an hour before telling me she was the cleaning lady? Then when I finally got someone in charge, she wouldn't shut up about a town vote on indoor plumbing from 75 years ago! And all the laughing that goes on in that place, let me tell you, those people know as much about running a land office as my butt knows about putting up stovepipes! Simon cackled. That's enough out of you. This isn't funny. Sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to make fun of your problems. These aren't problems, Mr. Irving corrected him. They're nuisances. Like ants at a picnic. It's a hassle, but eventually you get around to stepping on every one of them. The head ant was insulted.